Welcome to Just Men, a life changing program that resonates hope as well as encouragement. The program gives you information and inspiration for the glory of God. I'm your host, Jeff Tate, and thank you for joining Just Men. On today's program, we have a very special guest. This is his first time being on Just Men. Please welcome T.J.TENENT. Brother TJ, welcome to Just Men.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
It's a tremendous blessing for you to be on our program. And as I said before and offset, you add value to our program, and we just want to thank you for being a guest on our program.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I looked at the justmentv.com website. It was awesome. You had some really good speakers, some really good guests. Hopefully I can measure up.
Wow, well, you will measure up. And let's kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about who is T.J.TENENT, your upbringing, and how your mind was set, on the path that you're even on today in terms of that.
I had a really good childhood. I was born and raised in South Louisiana, actually in a small town called Zachary. My parents are still together. They've been together for 52 years.
Wow.
And my greatest childhood memory is spending time with my parents every weekend. My dad and my mother would take me and my sister out somewhere, even if it was something just to get ice cream. We didn't have a lot of money, but there was a lot of love in my house. And I remember my dad, my mother, and my grandfather used to love to laugh, and I think I get a lot of that from them.
Wow, that's beautiful. I'm going to go deep early with you because I know there's just so much depth there and really kind of surpass some of the things that normally we talk about, but get into what has been some of the challenges of your faith.
I was born in the country in southern Louisiana. Like I said earlier, my dad was a Sunday school teacher. We went to church and Sunday school every Sunday. And I like to consider myself someone who came from nothing to something, back to nothing, and maybe back to something again. And it was a great childhood, but one of my biggest challenges, I remember going through a divorce, and I hated that. It was just the worst thing I've ever gone through, one of the worst things I've ever gone through in my life. And ultimately, to fast forward a little bit, I moved to Dallas, and I remember being in this one-bedroom efficiency apartment and having everything I owned, every material thing I owned taken from me. And I was sitting there, and I remember being there in the winter time and having to run hot water to heat that apartment, having no food and working 3 jobs, 16 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, did that for 5 years. And I think it was just stupid pride that didn't steer me toward welfare or any of the other government agencies. I was just too proud and embarrassed. I didn't want anybody to know it, but at the same time, I was mentally challenged and spiritually challenged. While I was in that apartment, people used to tease me because I had to run hot water, and they'd see the windows fogged up and say, "Hey, what, you got a bunch of women in there?" I said, "No, I don't have a lot of women," but I remember keeping a diary. And a lot of times, and it wasn't really a diary, it's just a notepad that I had from the hotel that I worked at on the night shift. And I remember sitting in the dark, because I didn't have utilities, and just crying. And sometimes there would just be one sentence in that diary, and that one sentence would be, "God, why is this happening to me? Why am I having to go through this?" And I think that was his way of showing me, TJ, you got a little too big for your britches. You were thinking about money. You were thinking about material things instead of thinking about your wife and your 2 children. So I'm going to take everything away from you, everything you hold precious in life, material and otherwise, and I'm going to hone you in to the man and the person that I really want you to be. So over time, I remember, and this part of the story is a little weird, and I don't know if this happened or not. I might have been just delirious from starvation because the only food I had was food from the hotel that I took and basically stole. And the 2 nights that I didn't work at the hotel, if I didn't steal food for those 2 nights, I didn't eat. So I'm 6'4", 285 pounds now. Back then, I was about 126 pounds, basically starving to death. And I'm sitting there on the floor feeling sorry for myself, and I'm not sure if this actually happened or not, but this rat comes in the room, and I'm thinking, wow, what's this rat doing in my house? And we actually have a conversation, and I say, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I just came in to get out of the cold." And I said, "Well, there's nothing here, it's not even that warm in here." And he said, "Okay, I'll see you later." And that's when I had an epiphany in my life. And I thought, I'm sitting here feeling sorry for myself. This rat is healthy, fat. I'm feeling sorry because I don't have anything to eat. I'm saying nobody will give me a job, a decent job, because, they don't like me. Well, I really didn't like myself. And I thought I knew God. I didn't really know God. So I started to really say, let me take charge of my life and stop blaming other people for my problems and start having a real relationship with God. Because the relationship, I feel like my relationship with God now is kind of like a friend. And I see that friend on the highway, and as I pass by, oh, there's my friend. I'm going to stop and see if he or she needs help. And then if it's somebody I don't know, I may or may not stop, but I wouldn't have to think about it if I knew that person. My relationship with God is the same way. I talk to him every day, throughout the day. I say a prayer for someone just through conversation. If you say, hey, my wife's sick, I'd say a quick prayer for Jeff and his family. And I feel like now I know God and he knows me. And what he did was put me through all that. I know that I can go 2 or 3 days without food. I know I can go a couple of days without water. Not that I'd want to go through that again, but that was his way of saying, TJ, you can really do anything you want to do. You can really be anybody you want to be on the face of this planet. And that relates to success. And most people nowadays relate success to how big your house is or what kind of car you drive. That is not success. Money, not success. The things that make you successful are who you see when you look in the mirror in the morning. What do people think when they hear the name T.J. Tennent? Do they think good things or do they think bad things? And most people, especially in your audience, when they look in the mirror, they already have a pretty good idea of what people think about them when they hear their name. And if it's not that great, it's your job to try to fix it with God's help. And he is willing to make everyone successful. He is just itching. It's a fever for him to see everyone do well and enjoy life to 150% every day. I get up in the mornings at 3:57 a.m., 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And when I go to bed, whenever the day's done, my wife will tell you, hey, it takes TJ maybe 10 or 20 seconds because nothing is promised to you. No tomorrow isn't promised to you or I. Something could happen on our way home tonight. So I try to live every single day to its absolute fullest. I try to squeeze every ounce of blood out of every day and think instead of like I was thinking back when I was a few years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, well, it's such and such fault. I can't get a job. Or it's my ex-wife's fault that, I'm in this situation. Instead, now thinking, I went through that situation because that was God's way of reprogramming the way that I think so that now when I wake up every morning, I'm at 100%. I'm ready to go grab that day and try to do everything I can to make that a successful day.
Wow, that's beautiful. I tell you, as you were speaking, and I think about a lot of times the message that so often resonates in my heart is identity. I know that in identity there is energy. And many times we are excited about the things we know. And it's amazing how God gets excited about us because he knows us, And it's amazing now that when you shift your relationship to where it's where you want to know him, for yourself, and to know him from the inside out, I think is so beautiful. And that's sometimes hard for men, particularly when they have their identity wrapped up in possessions, in profession, in those things that are external. I know myself, before I had this sort of quantum change or this shift in my life in terms of going towards God, was I thought that the identity of a man was built in his wealth. The identity of a man was, adventure. I want some adventure, pleasure, those kind of things, achievement, So you begin to wrap yourself in those kind of ideologies of what manhood was and what your true identity, what your identity was, which was a facade. And as you said, when you have that shift, or that awakening of consciousness of who you really are in him, then those things shift to where now you're seeking spirituality. You're seeking God's will. You're seeking peace. You're seeking the welfare of others. Those kind of things, and you're right, that's what builds wealth. That's what builds really what Jesus would call the kingdom of God, where it's no respect of person based on his external things, but it's based on an internal dwelling of him on the inside of us. And so I think it's so beautiful as you talked about now your relationship. Speaking of relationship, I want to go into a little bit in relationship, particularly now, and how do you regroup your life, after going through that process. I know it took a process for you to go through, and you're continuing to go through a process. So give us some perspective on that in terms of how do you go through that and have a new life and a new lease on life the way you do.
That's a great question. After I turned myself around and started to reestablish that relationship with God, a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call. Actually, a neighbor called me and said, hey, there's a company that wants you to come to work for them. And I started working for a very large company in a manager's position, which was great. And it came with a company car, which was great because I didn't have a car. And about a month later, I was in another state, in Arkansas, and met the beautiful woman that I'm married to today. And, we had nothing. And when I met her, I said, look, I got nothing to offer. I don't even own the car that I'm driving. I'm $60,000 back child support, $40,000 back taxes. And most women ran away from that screaming. And my wife's response was, you look like you got some potential. And one of the things that she asked me is, are you a Christian? Mm-hmm. And I knew right then, I said, I'm going to marry this woman because she is awesome. So now, today, let's fast forward to today and the things that my wife and I went through. We're both basically working class people. We work really, really hard. We work together. And we built our lives together through God. We'd get on our knees and pray together before we go to bed. I'd pray when I got up. We'd pray. We eat dinner at the kitchen table with our son. He's not playing video games with his dinner there. But I think to go from where I was, being a materialistic man, and that's what I thought manhood meant, was exactly what you said. Hey, I've got the nicest car in this little town that I'm in. I've got the nicest house. And it wasn't about that at all. It's more about my relationship and the love that I have for God. And more than anything, realizing how much love he had for me. Because a lot of times you feel yourself looking over your shoulder and you're thinking, well, yeah, God loves me. And I was going through the motions. I was going to church on Sundays and not really paying attention to the word that was spoken, or maybe even worse than that, not even understanding the words that were being spoken. Whereas now, I really understand those words, and I understand the passion that God has for every living human being, irregardless of race or sexual orientation or any of those things. God has a love for you greater than you could ever imagine. I mean, and again, when I go to certain meetings here in Nashville with certain exotic car clubs or motorcycle clubs, and I see these people with these really nice cars, and people, and I want everyone to know, people who are in the situation that I was in, that success is there for you. There is no real difference between the guy driving the Ferrari and the guy driving the Ford, except the guy driving the Ferrari thinks he's supposed to drive that type of vehicle. Every success story, including your relationship with God, starts with a thought. That's it. That's always the first thing you do. So when you decide, you know what, I really want to have a relationship with God, you may not even know who God is or even understand the principle of Christianity or any of that, but it's a study, and it's a continuing study and a daily workshop to be successful, and ultimately, maybe later on, you make that trip to heaven, which is my ultimate goal. But you have to remember, you have to have compassion. When my wife and I'll give you an example of how great my wife is. We were in our car one day, and she didn't have any change, and there was one of the ladies on the side of the road selling the newspapers, and she was coming out of her supermarket, and she didn't have change. So she got home, and she said, there was a lady out there. I didn't have any change. So, I didn't give her anything. So we're on our way out to grab a burger, and we see this lady again. And my wife says, you know what? Let's turn around and go give her something. Now, a lot of people see these guys and these women on the side of the road, and they think, well, I'm not going to do anything. They probably are stealing the money, or they're on drugs, or they're drinking it away. You know what? That's not really your concern. Your concern is to have compassion for the poor, compassion for the weak, and do what you can to help those people. Now, once you help them, if they do the wrong thing, that's not on you. That's on them. But one of the principles, I think, of Christianity is to help other people. And it could be something as small as when I walk through the building at my office to say good morning to security, as 100 or 200 other people walk before me and not even acknowledge them as being a person. It can be that small, or it could be giving money, as my wife and I did to that woman that was on the side of the road. All of those things help you grow in your manhood and help you grow as a Christian.
Wow, that is beautiful. And it's amazing you talk about giving is really an essence of who you are. Many times we think that it's a form of ministry, but ministry is who you are. All those things are really tied to your identity. And so when we look at the greatest example of a gift, with Christ being our atonement and our perpetuation for our sins and reconciling us to this rightful relationship with God, and how he gave his life, he says something very powerful to the men when he says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and he gave himself. He watered and nurtured. And it's amazing how when you do give, it should be a part of who you are and not be tied to the results of what your giving is. Mm-hmm. It should just be you, a reflection of who you are in your life. It's just like love and all the other things. I know sometimes people want to measure how much we give or how much we forgive, which is my next subject I want to talk to you about. Not only giving, but talk about the power of forgiveness. And what does that mean to you, and how have you seen that work effectively even in your own life?
Ooh, that's another great point. Forgiveness is extremely important as far as you being a Christian and a man. When I look at my Facebook page or any of the other social networks out there, and when I teach people or do speaking or seminars, and when I talk to people, it's very important to ask for forgiveness, not only from God, for people that you may have offended, whether it's now or in the past. And you're going to run across sometimes when someone's going to think that you offended them and you really didn't, or you may think that you didn't, but what you think you did is not important. What's important to that person is that you tried to ask for amends for what they perceived that you did. And I'll give you an example. When I first started working for the company that I work for now, had this horrible relationship with another manager. And I mean, we were at each other's throats, and I was trying to do everything I could using all the tools in my toolbox. And this guy, I thought, just hated my guts. So one day, I'm praying over it, and I'm thinking, wow, why can't I build a relationship with this guy? And I asked him to go to lunch with me and have a hamburger. And I spent, $5 or $6 for these hamburgers, but it allowed me a chance to sit down with him and talk to him, and him talk to me, and we got to know each other. And he's retired now. He's living in Japan, but we formed a relationship that was just unbelievable. To this day, we're still in communication with each other. And it worked out. He thought I was attacking him, and I thought he was, and it was, none of those things were true. But when I think back to my relationship with my ex-wife and my relationship with the 2 children that I had in that marriage, it's important to try to mend those wounds. And even in the marriage that I have now, to try to lead by example. You can run around and say, hey, I believe in God, I'm a Christian, but you have to walk the walk and talk the talk. So someone, when they see you, when I met you, I knew you were a Christian. I could see that light in your eyes and that fire that you had in your heart. And I think it's very important to be able to see that. Not just say I'm a Christian, but when they see me and meet me and talk to me the first time, they understand, man, I bet that guy's a Christian. If that's what they think when I walk away, I was successful in my task, because I want them to see it's fun to be a Christian. A lot of people think it's a lot of work. This guy's praying all the time and he's going to church. I don't have that kind of time. It's more to it than that. It's about being a father to my son. And if I'm in my home office and he comes in and says, Dad, you got a second? You have to take that second. You have to. Even with your wife, you talked about love. I love my wife. I tell her every day I love her. When she calls me and I answer the phone, I say, hello, beautiful, because they need that. They need that support. They need that admiration. And I travel a lot all over the world, and my wife works here locally in one of the hospitals, and the nurses ask her a lot, do you ever worry about your husband messing around? And you know, her response to that is, he's just not wired that way. That's not one of the things that I have to worry about. And she's right. That never crosses my mind because I'm filled to the brim, all 6'4" of me, with the Spirit of God. And like I said, that didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in 5 years. It didn't even happen in 10 years. It's still a work in progress for me to continue building that relationship. Same as you do with your spouse or your significant other or your children. That is also a work in progress to try to be the man that you want your son to be. If you see your son watching you and you're not the man, or your daughter and you're not the man that you think that they should be, or the type of man that you want your daughter to fall in love with when she meets someone at that time, you may not be living the right way. And you can always look to God for answers. Man, he will give you. He may not give them to you when you want them, and probably will never give them to you when you want them. But you just it's just a work in process all the time, every day, just like anything else. Your relationship with God is same as a football player works out. He has to work out every day to get to that apex of his capability. You have to work out that relationship with God every single day to get to the apex of that relationship, so that when your time comes, you have no regrets.
Wow, that's beautiful. I tell you, you've hit on a lot of things that really inspire me, and there's so much I want to talk to you about. One is, when I think about the spiritual journey that we seem to be thrust upon in our lives, and we see and we search and we find, why did this happen in our life and why did that happen? And then those things begin to sharpen us and purge us of the things that many times we're attached to that are unlike our Father. And so one of the things that I've discovered in my own life, in my own search, and my own sort of chastisement from the Father, is that many times the spiritual journey is to unearth the treasure that's on the inside of us. And it's amazing, unless we go through those challenging times, and many of us are running away from those challenging, when the Father himself have placed them there. We've come in this age where many times we give credit to, the enemy is busy or the devil is busy, and we're losing sight of the sovereignty and the providence of God and how he works. And I used to blame, like you were talking about, and yet I was blaming others for things that I need to get out of my life anyway. Those things that was unlike him, unlike the Father.
Exactly.
And so God began to purge them to unearth a treasure that you and I have now. So when the men are talking about, boy, I don't want to go into that because it's just a commitment, it's like marriage, man, that's a marriage. You go to be involved in a church and ministry, and you're talking about God. God is omnipresent. He's everywhere at the same time. At least with a girlfriend or marriage, I can have some separation. But you're talking about a Father who is there, who is omnipotent, who's omniscient. And so sometimes men are challenged by that. But we're talking about the reward of the relationship, to where he empowers you with his Spirit. He empowers you with his presence. He empowers you with his gifts. And it's amazing when you've been touched by God. When you're in the presence of God, one of the litmus tests is his peace and his rest. Many of us are running and searching, trying to find rest and trying to find peace. And yet God says, come unto me, all that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burdens are light. So he's crying out to the men to come unto me. And I see that in your eyes, and I hear that in your heart, man, of how you turned away from the old man, to go towards the new man in God. In our last and closing moments of inspiration, you talked about your family, you've talked about your friends and people you work with, and how they all have played a part in shaping and molding you and bringing you into the man that you are today. Talk about young people, and what do you see for them in these days in terms of what God has placed in your heart, and where you see the direction in terms of that?
You know, young people nowadays, for me, that's a tough subject. I was taking my son to school this morning, and there was a young man there, and they wear the low pants now. I'm not sure what they call it, but he's showing his underwear. For me, that and even beyond that, the tattoos all over and things like that. And you and I probably didn't go through that phase. We went through a phase when we were growing up, but maybe not that phase. And when I try to see those men, I think, wow, I wonder if he could look in the mirror and see himself, not his physical self, but his spiritual self, and see if he's growing from a spiritual standpoint. And I think they need that in their lives. A lot of them have single parents, they're single mom, single dad, and you need both in that household, or you need a mentor. And I mentor a lot of those young men when I see them, because they see me and think, hey, there's success. Success is more about money. It's about who you are, like I said before. It's about your relationship with God, and understanding that that has to be a part of your life.
Wow, man, you have touched us, and we got to have you back on.
Oh, I would love to come back.
To share more, and you're an inspiration. You're God's best, and we just thank God for you. And I tell you, I'm excited that God has brought us together and put us in unity with Him, unto Him that is able to keep us and to present us faultless, the only wise God, both power and dominion unto Him. Last few seconds, what words of encouragement do you have?
Pray every day. My wife and I thank God every night before we go to bed about all the blessings that have been bestowed on us. And what we went through when we first got married, and some of the trials and tribulations that we dealt with, we came through them. And now God is blessing us based on what we did, and taking the high road, not the low road.
Wow, that is awesome. Stay focused. Wow.
Thank you. It has been my pleasure.
Awesome.
Definitely my pleasure.
Oh, man, this pleasure is all ours, man. Man, awesome. You just flowed through.